everybody, and welcome to the Sacred Matrix. Is that the show? Yes, Sunday. And I'm your host, Jenna Care Lessin, with my co-host, Dr. Sasha Alex Lessin. And you're listening to Revolution Radio's Studio B. And our producer is a mad painter, also known as Thomas Becker. And today we have an Anunnaki panel with Gillian Green and Glenn Bogue and Dr. Sasha Alex Lessin and myself. And we're gonna connect the pieces of the puzzle, the dots, and assemble this picture, which will take us back in time on through the cosmos and right to this now, the history of human beings and how we got to get here now. And I'm very excited, so you can tell I'm very excited.
Yeah.
And these are my friends. Can you hear us? Are we live? Yeah, okay. I think we're live. I met Jillian years ago. She and her husband George came to a conference in Lachlan, and we just clicked right away. We were like a bunch of bees all buzzing together and talking about this incredible story of humanity. Then I met Glenn. I don't know how I met Glenn. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I met Glenn somewhere, and we finally met.
I called you 5 years ago.
5 years ago. Okay.
I called you and asked to be on your show.
Oh, okay.
That's how we met.
I've talked to thousands.
And she's just got round to you, has she, Glenn?
No. I've been on about 10 times so far. Twice a year I go on.
Oh, that's good.
Right. Well, how about let's start with would you like Glenn to go first, or Jillian, you want to go first? Say hi to Sasha, too. Sasha?
Okay, so I want to just let the listeners know that this is a very important discussion we're having here, and it concerns something that almost everybody's interested in, is because the question is Enki and Jesus the same person? And that's what Glenn raises, and Jillian, Uncle David Toth, knows Jesus, and she's mentioned that he's here to help us too through these troubled times. And so I'm so excited to have you two talking about that.
Right. And so back to what I was saying, Jillian, do you want to go first and tell people who you are in your little bio, or do you want Glenn to go first? Ladies' choice.
Let Glenn go. I know nothing of Glenn, so let him go first. I'd love to know something.
Glenn, tell us about yourself, your research.
Well, I was a normal person until about 1997, when I received an image in the trunk of a tree in Toronto, where I'm from, and in that tree trunk was the actual statue of the painting of Fatima in Portugal in 1917. And so it took me on a long path into the Catholic Church research and to the Templar Knights that were in Jerusalem in early 1100s into 1200. And so that's what really fascinated me about the work that I listened to today about Jillian. If it was her, the show I listened to, I believe it's her, because I looked at the booklet she has done on her husband's website, No Hoax, and the information lined up that Jerusalem was a critical area. And now I am, in North America. I'm in Canada, in the north, and now this meridian has shifted over to North America, and I'm absolutely stunned. So my background as a lawyer and an author and an Olympic athlete, and I've done many, many things. And we are just primed to break this open. And on the show up with Ms. Lau, Antonia Lau, she mentioned being in Mount Shasta on 2012 at the solar eclipse, where she had a photograph of Nibiru right beside the sun during the eclipse. So everything is just opening up. And so I'll turn it back to you guys and to have Jillian introduce herself. So fascinating.
Well, that's really exciting, Glenn, and I can totally agree with it. You know, especially I'm excited that because it seems I'm the only one who's speaking about this, and it is so important that you mentioned about Jerusalem and the Crusades and the importance of it. And so many people think that the Crusades was fought for religious reasons. In actuality, of course, as you must know, it was fought for political reasons. The kingship was given to a human on planet Earth so that the humans could run the planet for themselves and the Anunnaki could leave effectively. The kingship was given, as I'm sure your research has shown you, on the Mount of David in Jerusalem. And this means that Jerusalem has been, since the beginning of man's rulership on this planet, the premier kingship of this planet. And therefore, even today, every royal household, every claiming leader on this planet owes first obedience to whoever rules Jerusalem. And I have to say, Mr. Trump was one smart cookie when he moved our embassy into Jerusalem, because this is the key of rulership on this planet. Now, having said that, I also concur with the fact that now the focus has switched from the Middle East, not in the matter of rulership, for the earth, for the kingdom of the earth, but in the matter of the future forward movement of the planet, it's moved directly from Jerusalem to, as I'm sure you know, Glenn, slightly northwest of Edmonton, Alberta, which is where the new landing field is.
I cannot believe it. I cannot believe this.
That's the new landing. That's the new landing field for the fleet coming in on the return of the Anunnaki. That's where they will land. And we have down in here in Montana a location where I sat at their bidding for 12 years with a little chain around my neck holding a medallion where one of their signaling centers is. And the other one, which reverberates energetically, is actually under a convent in Spokane. And it's a massive, massive stone that the Jesuits, when they built this place on the top of a hill in the 1920s, tried to blow up with dynamite, and it wouldn't budge, it wouldn't move. All the little holes are in there where they packed it with dynamite, and they couldn't blow it up. So they built around it, and it has this huge vibratory field coming off it. And when I first went to look at it, I said to the nuns, "Don't just clear all the laundry and stuff away from this area and keep it open and tidy, because this is a very sacred place." It's one of the two signaling places that when the fleet makes its new pass around, landing pass, will actually draw them in. And then Chief Mountain in Canada, in the glacier on the border of Canada and America, it draws them into the point of Chief Mountain, and then from Chief Mountain, approximately 400 miles, you go on the landing pass. And if anyone who is listening to us talking today is familiar with the work of Mr. Sitchin, Zechariah Sitchin, if they go in his book and look at the map that he had showing the landing pads in Lebanon, where the Cedars of Lebanon are, and of course the stations on Sinai, if you draw that map, take that map and overlay it on the area I'm speaking of, it's exactly the same, give or take 5 or 10 miles in any direction. They just have repeated it, but they've moved it over here now, and that's where it is, and that's where they're landing. That's what I have to say about that.
Can we go backwards to find out? Can we go, Jack? Can we go backwards? Can we go backwards? Can we go, Jack? Can we go backwards to find out Jillian's background? She sounds like she's about 18 years old.
Oh, no. I'm 83. I'm 83.
I'm dyslexic. Sorry.
Oh.
Yeah, and I.
Oh yeah, okay. I can be 38. I can be 38. I'll be 39 again. The perpetual 39, right? No, I'm no youngster at all. But this is just interesting to me that they've actually laid down. Pardon?
For the landing, are they going? Is that going to be your opportunity for those of you who are left behind to go back? Is that part of the show?
Wait, we gotta go back because Glenn doesn't know who Jillian is, and Jillian is an Anunnaki who came into this body with full memory of her existence as an Anunnaki. Can you fill in that piece for Glenn and the listeners?
Oh, okay. I've been coming to this planet for a very long time, and I was born without loss of memory. I have continuing consciousness for literally hundreds of thousands of years. And way back about 3,500, 4,000 years ago, when Ningashida, who, because of these circumstances at the present time, is like my grandfather, when he was and his brother Marduk kicked us out of Egypt, we went down to what is now South America, to the area that is now known as Peru. And we worked from there for a very long time, and we were all up and down the Americas and even across into Gaul and Europe, Central Europe. Building henges. We were building henges all over and teaching people, and my job was counting. Then I looked after all the stores, the warehouse. I was like the store's keeper, and I taught counting wherever we went. I taught people how to count, putting knots in strings, which were kind of like an abacus, but in strings. And about 3,500 years ago, I ran away with a young officer, and who I wasn't supposed to be seeing at all, and we headed north. And up in the north of what is now South America, you still had the evil priesthood, you might say, of the ancient cultures that were existing at that time. And these were the ones where the priest would stab you with an obsidian knife and rip your heart out and eat it, Well, this particular high priest had a real thing against my grandfather because he didn't like what he was teaching or what he'd heard of him on the travels. And so they captured me. They captured both of us, as far as I know. I never heard what happened to the young man at that time. I know what's happened to him since, but I didn't at that time. And he drugged me. Had me drugged, dragged me to the top of this stone altar, cut my heart out with an obsidian knife. But instead of eating it, which they normally did to steal your power, he threw it into the fire behind me while it was still beating. In those seconds, the heart can actually keep beating,
Uh-oh.
Yeah, turned off.
Her heart stopped beating.
Hey, is she still there, man? Is she still online? I'm mad. All right. Okay. Can you hang up and call her right back or something? Will that work? She's having problems with her phones.
So this is a first-hand account of an amazingly important historical event that you're just hearing it for the first time over the radio now.
Right. So we need to know what happened.
We have to slow down because Sasha, she's matching right into my last 90 days of research. Like, I'm in shock here. No one knows the stuff I'm doing.
Listen, it's not an accident, Glenn. As you well know, you've been meant to talk to each other.
And that's why
yes, I know, but if we could slow down for the audience gets a feel for what's going on here. This is absolutely stunning.
I'm
that's
sorry,
right.
did I miss something? My phone went funny.
Yes.
Did I miss something?
Yeah, I marked down where you were.
The last thing we heard.
Okay, do you want to say it? Go ahead, say it, honey. Go ahead, say it. Okay, I'll say it. I took notes. Your heart was still beating as they threw it into the fire.
Yes,
That's
so they threw it onto the fire. Well, as you, I'm sure, all know, there's no such thing as nothing. Everything has to be something. You can't have something from nothing. So your soul energy, when it's in your body in a lifetime, when you're using it, is housed in the form of hydrogen molecules in a little space that exists at the base of your heart. And when you throw a living heart into fire, fire transforms. It's transformational. So what happens when you actually do that, you disintegrate the soul energy. You scatter the soul energy. So kind of like in the movies when they kill the vampires by putting them out in the sun. It's the same idea, right? But it really is a true idea. So my soul energy was scattered all over this quadrant of the solar system practically. And so when the rest of the Anunnaki left, I could not go with them. I got left behind. And of course, I've been furious about that ever since. But for the last 4,000 years, I've been coming in human incarnations to keep my consciousness growing, to keep my memory running, to keep me ticking over, as it were, lifetime after lifetime, until I could collect it all back together. And this last couple of lifetimes, and certainly this lifetime, I've got the last dregs of it gathered back up again. And essentially, I'm ready for off. So that's about where I am. I am contracted for the next 300 to 400 years to keep coming back to this planet to assist with the changes that are coming, because about 1990, I think it might have been 92, somewhere in there, a new program was begun with humans, with the advice and help of the Anunnaki as they asked for it. And this is actually returning the two missing genes into the human gene pool. As you all know, I'm sure, when we did the genetic engineering, it was a bit like, I don't know, rough surgery. 4 genes were taken out, but only 2 Anunnaki genes were put back in. Now, this was not a mistake. It was intended at the time for a variety of reasons. But the end result was that in doing that, 2 things happened. One, we left humans much more warlike even than they were by nature, by instinct. But more importantly, we left them with all their autoimmune diseases and no resistance to them. So now we have a human population which has all these terrible autoimmune diseases built into its system, all the arthritic conditions, all the things like MS and all those that affect the sheathing of the nerves. These are all autoimmune diseases that are really fundamentally available to the human body because of the missing genes. So this program was started over in Switzerland way back in the early 90s, and they have introduced 2 more genes, 2 more Anunnaki genes into the human population. And it's estimated it will take 300 to 400 years to spread through the entire world's population. But when it does, the end result for everybody will be, hopefully, that they are less inclined to be warlike, but perhaps, in my view, more importantly, or as importantly, is that they will no longer be suffering from these particular diseases that are a real plague to mankind, because they cause so much pain and suffering, and it's terrible. So this is where we're at now with the return of the Anunnaki.
Excellent. So let's give each person a chance to ask you questions. I know Sasha has questions, and Glenn, please ask Jillian to clarify anything she said thus far, or anything you want to ask her. Go ahead.
Do you want me to go now?
Yes,
what happened in Switzerland? What happened in Switzerland? I'm coming out of a shock. So what happened in Switzerland in the early 1990s?
Well, there is a location there. As far as I recall, because I have only been there out of body, I have never been there physically, but I have been several times out of body. So I only have an awareness of the location, and I think it's on the Alsace-Lorraine border, but it's over into Switzerland. It's in that general area, and I can't remember the name of the village we go through. It begins with an A. I know that. I can remember that, but I can't remember the name of it. And there is this building there. This looks like a white castle, and it just sits off to the right side of this country road, and it sits back from the road. It's got a few turrets at the front, but when you go through the big gates around the back, there is this huge building, almost like a giant warehouse, and inside there, the actual top of that building opens so that small landing craft can come down into it. And now for a very, very long time, that's been used as, like maybe the last 200 or 300 years, has been used as a location where the Anunnaki would come and work with humans. And the thing that they've been doing there since the early 90s is this work with the human genome and introducing these new genes. You can get a better date on the timing. My memory goes blank sometimes. But can you remember what year that Dr. Clark and those scientists discovered or mapped the human genome, when we first mapped the human genome? Because it was the year that humans did that. And the reason that it was that year was because the Anunnaki had to wait till people in human form did it themselves so they could then teach them the next steps. Because obviously the Anunnaki are in big trouble because they did the original engineering without anybody's permission. And that's, as you know, a big no-no. So that's
You mean Francis Collins? Do you mean Francis Collins' work?
Yes, probably. Yes, and there was a Dr. Clark, an Englishman called Dr. Clark, who was involved in it, I remember. So, he might have been an American who spoke English.
Who is it that said no? What force or a body of beings said that you must not?
It's kind of like, when you come to America, or rather, let me reverse that. When you go to England, it's kind of an understood no-no that nobody mentions, that you don't put your elbows on the table and pick your food up with your hands, right? Even though when you come to America and you go to McDonald's, it's okay to lean on the table and it's okay to pick your hamburger up with your hands. Right? So there are just kind of some understandings throughout the universe that have been arrived at a long, long time ago and that everybody out there agreed to. And the first of these rules, the biggie, is you are not allowed, as a spacefaring people, you are not allowed to interfere with the ongoing development of any species on another planet. You're just not allowed to do it. That's why if they do it, it's warfare. Right? It's not. They make war. They don't have the right to do it. And we could say that that applies in any civilization, right? We would think it applied if a certain foreign power started moving into us in America or Canada and started telling us what to do, right? So
okay, but you said they're coming back. That they are now.
Yes, they are. They are coming back
because we requested it. Because we asked them to, and we have the ability to assist them in the genetic manipulations that need to be done in order to be.
Yes, but no, they're not. No, Glenn, they're not coming back because we asked them to. They're coming back because they have an obligation to do so, and they can't do it until. They could not do it until humans were in a position to cooperate with them. In other words, they're asking permission. It's not that we're asking them, it's that they are asking permission. And this is about resolving their own karma. Karma it's not an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. It's when there are heavy-duty biased emotional responsibilities that we have created in any lifetime, and we carry that forward, and it blocks. We might keep reincarnating, but it actually blocks our forward spiritual movement until we neutralize that energy. And the Anunnaki are obliged to. They were obliged to come back, of course, when they sent the Christ. He wasn't even chosen. He volunteered. He made a deal and he volunteered. But the deal was that he gets to rule here next time. And so, yes, he is coming back. And yes, he is going to be the ruler. Whether overtly or whether behind the scenes, whether he's going to be, like Ra or Amen-Ra, I don't know. I have no idea. That's beyond my pay scale at the moment to know. But he's definitely coming back, and he's coming back to resolve the issues of karma that are holding the Anunnaki back as a race. Half of them decided a long time ago they wish to rework to re-achieve their former, let's say, spiritual glory, which they had certainly lost over the last several millennia with all their scrapping and fighting and fornicating and carrying on. So they've really gone downhill. And a long time ago, they decided, about half of them, that, you know, they wanted things as they used to be. And in order to move back to that, they have to straighten out the mess they made on Earth. You can't just make a big mess and walk away from it. Not anywhere in the universe, not in your own life or in any situation. We're all responsible for our own messes. And the Anunnaki are responsible for theirs, and that's why they're coming back. So maybe they want to help. Maybe they're doing it just because they're obliged to clean up. And some of them are certainly coming back because they like it here. And Marduk is one of them who absolutely loves life on Earth and is more than happy to come back and start bossing people around. So it's going to be interesting.
This is Glenn. Wasn't Marduk seen by Hill, Michael Lee Hill in Ohio 2 years ago, Janet?
I don't know.
Yes, yeah.
So, Sasha, explain to Jillian about who Michael Lee Hill is and what he says.
Michael Lee Hill feels his oneness with the spirit of Enki. He feels like he is an emanation of Enki, and that he was brought and he's also a member of the Iroquois tribe. Which was in contact, and say they were in contact. He known as the peacemaker in his ancestry, and so he was brought by a guy named Loki to a place where he met Marduk, and Marduk said he was sorry he had created such playing people against each other and something, but it was necessary for us to get to the point where we can now appreciate that the time has come for the return of Enki and the age of Aquarius, and that Michael had a important role in bringing the wisdom of the Native Americans and the wisdom of the people that understand about the Anunnaki together, because it was there. We are all. That's who Michael Lee Hill is. He's like the Enki in modern form.
Well, thank you for telling me that. I don't know the gentleman. I don't know anything about him. I have great respect for the wisdom of the native people of the Indian nations, and their knowledge, some of the knowledge of them is quite phenomenal. Somebody being Enki on the planet, I agree with the idea of aspects of the great beings on the planet, because I know that's possible. The religious tell you that fragmentation of the soul is not possible. Well, that's incorrect. You can send as many fragments as you're capable of sending, depending on how great a being you are. So somebody being an aspect of Enki, I think is very possible, right? And maybe this gentleman is an aspect of Enki. But being actually Enki, you know, Enki is just a title, it's not a name. We're agreed on that, are we?
No. Go ahead.
Well, let's pass that around. How do you
the Enki, right? Enki is the commander on the planet, right? And he had rulership over the seas primarily. No, it's his title, not his name, right? And I could be mistaken on this because I have not done any real research, but unless I am much mistaken, the other name we know him by is Yahweh. And his brother, the Enlil, is Jehovah. So if somebody is claiming to be Yahweh, then they're claiming to be the biblical God. If somebody is on the planet saying, I'm Enki, in manifest form, well, they're claiming to be the God Yahweh. And I have reservations about that, let's put it that way. But being an aspect of the Enki, I'm sure that the great beings have sent many aspects down to bring information and to teach. So I'm interested to hear about this gentleman who has all this information, but I don't know him.
What he's done because of it's got something to do with he understands the sonar technology that Anunnaki used to do all kinds of things, and he understands it at a mathematical level and is making models of it and all kinds of things.
And they certainly do use a lot of laser technology. Whatchamacallit, when they produce holograms and things like that. So that's interesting. And it would be a way. And certainly the Enki was a scientist. I mean, that's what he was, a master scientist. As was his half-brother.
I'd like to go back and have Glenn. I want to figure out this title stuff. This is part of, figuring out this human title.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I don't think it's my phone. Okay, I think maybe it's somebody's speaker has like a wind blowing over it.
Yeah, I'm not sure what's going on. Why we have that. Glenn,
is that my phone?
Yeah,
there it is.
That's better.
Mute when you're not speaking.
Phone.
Okay, so Glenn.
Yeah.
Your research. We've all been talking about. Let's stick with one thing instead of going down the line with 20 topics, because we've got a lot to cover, and we'll probably have to do a couple of shows on this. But this whole title thing, and who was Enki? Of course, Zecharia Sitchin identified with Enki and made him Ea. E-A. Now, I don't know what God he was showing. More like his characteristics,
God of the waters.
Qualities was
God of the waters,
Aquarius and Poseidon and Neptune. But so into the Christian, he was probably Adonai. He was a kind person. He saved humanity.
Right.
So we don't know. But Glenn, interject your 2 cents about who's whom, the characters and their qualities, and what names they have at what time. What do you know?
Lucifer.
Or hypothesize.
The two people who are identified in history as the Son of Man, one is, of course, in the Bible, Jesus Christ. But Sitchin said that the Son of Man was also NK. And so I started from a principle that they're both the same person. And then I heard Jillian today saying that this one person from the council volunteered to come in as Jesus. But then she made the great statement at the start of the show I listened to that they swim. They come in their fish suits, they're the fish gods. And my theory shows that Jesus was not born in Jerusalem, but he swam up the River Jordan the way he swam up in the Chinese Sea. He appeared in Lake Titicaca, and he did the same thing to the Mayas. He appears as this shining being.
But that's Poseidon, right?
And I also have the Greek Poseidon. Same person.
Yeah. Yes. That's the Enki. That's Ea, right?
Yes.
That's the Enki. That's Ea, right? Now, what I said at the beginning was that kingship was given to man in Jerusalem, not that Jesus was born there. Kingship.
Yes. So I'm saying the Bible. There are 4 books of the Bible, but the founding books, which are John and Mark, say the same thing. This person was not born there. This person appeared in the River Jordan. And the later books, Mark and Matthew, done at the Council of Nicaea by the Pope, by Rome, invented this birth story. But if I go with John and Mark, starting with this person appearing in the River Jordan with his dove, Mary the Magdalene, which I posit is Ninma, and then they appeared in China as Fuxi and Nuhua. Yes. They appeared in Peru, and then they appeared in Peru as Mama Okla and Michael Capac. They came out of Lake Titicaca, this guy with blue eyes and long hair, and the Prince of Peace, the whole thing. and then he appears as Kukulkan or Quetzalcoatl in the Maya Mexico, and Ninma appears as the woman at Guadalupe, which is in the ancient language of Mexico, is not Spanish. She identifies herself there as the woman who fashioned the first Adam.
Yes, Ninma.
And this couple's gone all over the world. Ninma and Enki have gone all over the world with different titles. And so I'm stunned to hear you say that Enki, the name itself, is a title. What's his real name? Ea?
No, Ea is another title, right? See, when you see that letter E, remember Christ's name was Emmanuel, right? Right? And then look at how many words that maybe that went into Latin, right, or the Hebrew language, or that went into the Latin language, that have come down to us today and actually are Anunnaki words in the beginning. They are words from the Anunnaki language. Now, the letter E, right, because every letter in the alphabet, this was something they told me years ago. They said that nothing can complete itself on the planet historically. We can't come to the end of a historic cycle and era for human beings until we have the 26 letters of the English alphabet known all over the world. And I said, well, I asked David, I said, why is that? He said, well, because you only have so many words, so many letters, and so many numbers to understand with. If you want to understand the universe, you have to understand the numbers 1 to 9, because life is based on the numbers 1 to 9. And you have to, if you want to understand the history of the world and how it all is, then you have to have the 26 letters of the English alphabet. And he went on to explain that the Kabbalistic, the Jewish cult of Kabbalism, could never get to the level of enlightenment they were looking for, because they only had 21 letters in their alphabet originally, and then it went to 23. And he said, no, you've got to have the 26. Now, I've been spending most of my adult life playing with the numbers 1 to 9 and the letters A to Z, and I have a huge board set up that I've been carrying around for 30 years, and I keep writing on it and going back to it. And I really do understand it now, or at least I understand the surface level of it, not the total depth of it. But I'm nearly losing track of what I'm saying. This business of their names, the E in the Anunnaki language really translates as house. The word that we would think of as house, meaning that which encloses, that which carries, that which takes in, that which holds. So when you have the NT, it's saying, this is the house, meaning the person, the body. This is the house that commands the world. Or EA, this is the house that commands the waters. And it doesn't even mean it doesn't really mean the waters. It means this is the house that God has ordered to command the waters. Because the letter A is the first, the top one, and its reference goes back in their language to old Anu, who was the top man who was giving the orders down. So with Christ, you've got Emmanuel, and that literally translates as, this is the house that brings to you the Lord. El being the word for Lord, the Anunnaki word for Lord is El. Right? And so the Christ's name is, I am the person who's bringing you the instructions of God. Essentially, that's what it says. I am housing God.
Let me interrupt you, Jillian, just quickly. Janet.
Yeah.
She's quoting from my book 4.
Oh, I haven't read it yet. I need to do that. So
I'm just saying, this woman, whoever she is quoting from my book 4. I cannot believe this has happened.
I talked to her directly.
Say, Jillian, you're
because I'm referring to the audience. I'm referring to Janet, you guys' audience, that I had to guess that part. Because there's nowhere in the Bible that says that Jesus' name is related to the house. They think it's he's in a manger of some kind. And Sitchin said that name means house. And I took it back to the house of Anu. And here's Jillian, and here's Jillian confirming it. Wow.
Well, I'm only telling you what I know, and I honestly, I don't know this from what I've read or on this planet or what I've heard from I only know what the guys have told me and what my own memory contains. And I accept that two statements that go with that. One, anything they have told me about any subject matter to do with this planet and its history over the last 8 years, because they gave me the entire human history by the time, reminded me of it, what I didn't remember by the time I was 23 years old. So I've just been watching it all unfold for the last 50 years, right? 60 years. So they've never been wrong. I want to say they are 100% correct. So any information from them that I have not distorted in any way is 100% correct. Anything I do from memory is as good as my memory. And that can be, of course, as defective as anybody else's. I mean, I can get things wrong just like anybody else does when we try to remember things. But what I'm telling you is only information from those two sources. So if it coincides with something that you have read, I'm very happy to hear that, to give me some validation of, yes, I'm not crazy and my memory hasn't failed me yet.
Well, you know what Sitchin wrote was that Enki said, the past, the future shall be. The past, the future shall be, and that the time of judgment for both the Anunnaki gods and for earthlings is coming.
Exactly. And that's what I'm trying to say about they have to come back to straighten out their mess. You can't leave dirty karma behind. And right now, and this will be familiar to you and it is important for people to think about, there are two things that are attributed to the biblical Jesus, right? And one of these things is on the road to Calvary, he apparently stops and the women of Jerusalem are weeping. And I'm paraphrasing, of course, he says to them, why are you weeping? Don't weep for me. If you will do this when the wood is green, imagine what it will be like when the wood is dry. So I want to say loud and clear, hey folks, take a look around, the wood is dry. It's ready to catch fire any minute now, right? And the other thing that Christ also says is, if you follow me, if you do what I'm telling you, you can have eternal life. If you don't, you will die. And this is a subject about which I have never heard in all my life a minister teach or preach. And it is perhaps the single most important thing that Christ gives in his messages, that if you don't do it right, you will die. People have this illusion because of religious brainwashing for the last 2,000 odd years that they only have to believe a package, and that package is the way it's put together by whatever religion they're tied to, all the way from the Pope, the Baptist minister, the Methodist, whoever, right, puts together a package for them. And then they say to them, now you believe what we're telling you, and you'll go to heaven. You'll be eternal. You'll be an eternal soul. I am saying that is not correct. And Christ himself tells them it's not correct. He says, if you do it right, if you live the way I'm telling you, you can have eternal life. You will have eternal life. But if you don't, you will die. And he is talking about the time when the wood is dry, which is now, because we are coming to the end of a grand cycle, not just a geological cycle for planet Earth, but a cycle for our whole universe in which we exist. It's a complete realignment. The new light is flowing in that regenerates. The universe is expanding according to pi in every direction. And here we go. We're off on a new roll of the dice for the species. And when that happens, when you come to that moment in time of change from the old cycle to the new, there is this brief break in the space-time continuum. And those who have got it right and acknowledge it and recognize the truth of their own soul and claim their right to immortality, they will move forward into the new experience. But those who do not do it because they have chosen not to do that which was right, but rather that which is expedient. Got nothing to do with religion or belief structures or meditations or metaphysics. It's got to do with being a human being who has taken the trouble to value their humanity and evolve according to the opportunities presented to them, and make a real effort to be good human beings in every way that they can understand it, however that way is. If they have done that, yes, they will have every opportunity to move forward. But if they haven't, if they have kept their chakras operating throughout their lives at the basic survival levels that they come with, they are still origins, namely Earth. And when Earth goes through that massive change and everything that was is gone and new comes, they will be gone with the old. The same as maybe the trees will be gone, or whatever this dynamic change brings us, whatever this huge frequency change brings us. Now, do I think they are gone forever, cast into some kind of satanic hell or something? No, I don't. I don't think that's true at all. But what I do hold to be true, because this is how Spirit has explained it to me throughout my life, is that those who choose to cling to their old ways and are so attached to the material, they will simply continue to experience a material life. But the odds are that man himself, those that are left, those that are not capable of claiming their immortality and moving forward, will be left behind, hugely behind. In fact, the idea is that, or the thought is that it's very possible that they could go back to an Iron Age experience and have to start all over again with their evolutionary process. In other words, if they haven't made soul evolution, then they go down with the rest of the non-enlightened things and people on the planet. Does that make any sense to you?
It does, and the genetic intervention to stop the propensity to violence is critical. I understand. It's all starting to make a lot of sense.
Yes. That's why the Anunnaki are trying, because they are responsible for the human race, the Homo sapiens. And if they had done a better job, maybe 100% of humans would be ready for the next evolutionary step. Now, there are multiple things, of course, going on with this evolutionary step as well. There is the one that is a general sort of mass opportunity, kind of like now. Another opportunity coming for those who've already been to college and done their homework, and for them the opportunities are going to be huge. And the exciting thing about that is that it does represent about 10% of Earth humans. Now, that's not 10% of 8 billion people, because the 8 billion people on the planet are not all Earth humans. In fact, probably 75 or 80% of them originated from other planetary systems in the universe. And when the key change comes with the break in the space-time continuum, they will return home to their own planets. So you're probably going to be left with about, let's say as a number, 1.5 billion people. And so it will be 10% of the 1.5 billion people who are going to have this opportunity to make a huge evolutionary step, moved into much, much higher frequency experience of life itself, which will be phenomenal. And this is so exciting. I get very excited about it, because never since this universe began its production of highly civilized species on multiple planets, it's never happened before that a species should advance so rapidly. It's only 40,000 years since Ninmah perfected the human and produced the first real Homo sapien. And it's less than 10,000 years before they became educated Homo sapiens. And it's only 4,000 years since they were given rulership of their own planet, Earth, right? And yet in this very short 10% of their population has evolved to that level where they're ready to move onto a much higher multidimensional frequency. It's phenomenal. It's very exciting. Everybody's excited about it.
So,
Jillian, is it the women I write?
I'm sorry.
Glenn. I want Glenn to ask a question, and then Sasha, and then me. Go ahead, Glenn. Ask your questions.
My book 3 is called Sacred Sex, and it goes back to Ninmah and her teachings in a book called Isis and the Magdalene and the Sex Cult. And they talk about the female of the human race being extremely advanced. And she puts forth the substance every 14th and 28th day of her cycle, even after menopause, that is this intergalactic substance that can take the male with her. Is this advanced 10% based on the female leading the male, or do each male and female have the same power?
Well, first of all, I don't know this book that you're talking about. I don't remember Ninmah writing a book like that. When was she supposed to have written this?
Well, I think it was channeled. It would be channeled in now, but it was the only time I've seen Isis and the Magdalene, Mary Magdalene, in the same title, and then especially with the sex cult, what she was practicing.
Isis and
the Black Madonna.
Ninmah is Ninmah, right? And the sister of Enlil and Enki. Of Yahweh and Jehovah. She's their sister, Ninmah, right? Now, she has not particularly been involved in, let's say, post-creation on this planet, right? I don't remember when she left, but I do know that she's not spent most of time on this planet because she actually fell out with her brothers and took off. She stole a couple of the me's and took off for India, right? And spent her time in India. So you see her representation among the Asian cultures. And I do think that she took on the persona of Kuan Yin. That's the only one that I know at all about, right? But as for the rest, was Ninmah Isis? No, I don't think so. I think Isis is another. ISIS is another like Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. Isis, Cyrus, and Horus, right? They're the same throughout. You go back, you even pre-Sumerian, you've got these ongoing stories of the mother, the stepfather, and the son, right? The magical son. And so in modern times, we've got Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. And it's the same story. In fact, the same name for the mother in most of the cultures. And in the Sumerian cultures, you've got Mary, Marion, Marie, all going back to the pre-Sumerian in the, the Enuma Elish. You know, the Enuma Elish that tells the story of creation, right? The Sumerian tablets that tell the story of creation called Enuma Elish. That tells these same stories. So that is always a story. And it's an allegorical story, right? They're allegory. Was Ninmah Isis? No. I want to say no to that. That's not in my memory banks. It's not in anything that ever has been told to me. And my own looking now, my own awareness now tells me that is not correct. I want to say it's not correct. So the Magdalene is a whole other story. The Magdalene was the wife of Jesus. And a lot of people, even my Catholic friends, don't understand that all the great Notre Dame cathedrals that were built in Europe, especially the 5 big European ones with the one in Paris, the Notre Dame in Paris and various cities, they were built to honor the Magdalene, not the Virgin Mary. And so that what you said earlier about where Jesus was born, I mean, I can totally agree with you on that. I don't know that where you are saying he turned up in Jordan. I don't know that story as a story, but I do know that he wasn't, born in Bethlehem and raised in Nazareth. For one thing, there was no town of Nazareth in existence at the time Christ was on the earth. So it would be real hard for his stepfather to have had a workshop there when the place didn't even exist. But there was a company of Nazarenes, of course, in the desert, and his family were Nazarenes. And he was a Nazarene. He was raised as a Nazarene. And in the years that are pretty well not told about him, he was also studying in Persia. I know he went to India after the crucifixion.
Right here for 5 minutes. Jillian, we're on our commercial break, so hold that clock. We'll be back in 5 minutes. Hello, everybody, and welcome back. Oops, feedback. Welcome back to the Sacred Matrix, and I'm your host, Janet Care Lessin, with my co-host, Dr. Sasha Alex Lessin. Our producer is Thomas Becker, also known as a Mad Painter. You're listening to Revolution Radio, Studio B, and we have an Anunnaki panel with Gillian Green and Glenn Bogue, and we're going to come back after this little commercial. Please, everybody, go over to revolution.radio website and go up to the top left tab and make your donation for this show, because we are here bringing you all these wonderful shows. There's like 90 hosts or something, but we need to keep the lights on, pay the bills. And if you want to make an ongoing donation, please go up to the Patreon tab, and you can set up the recurring donations. And we really thank you very much for your donations, because that's what we need. Okay, Dr. Lessin.
Oh, just I am really excited to get some information, particularly about what happened in the crucifixion and after the crucifixion, and who Jesus is now, and you said he was here, Jillian, and so I want to know more about that.
And then we mentioned on the break that Sir Lawrence Gardner, he died about the same time as Sitchin, so that was in 2010, 2010, and he's missing about 450 years of history. So anyway, we want to talk about that, but we're going to let Glenn ask you questions so you get to know each other better, and you two are amazing historians and researchers, and I want to hear both of you compare notes, connect the dots, and even see where you differ, because we learn a lot in everything. Take it away, Glenn.
Well, it seems to me that the wedding at Cana, as Dr. Lessin is saying, is critical because it only appears in the Gospel of John, and the Knights Templar seem to have uncovered a genealogy, and it is of the Black Madonna. So we've heard Jillian say that Ninmah is not Isis, but it seems to me that Ninmah is the Black Madonna because she had a child out of wedlock, according to Sitchin anyway, and was never to marry. And Leo was, of course, the father, and he is also, his name was blackened in Egypt. And so at Cana, it seems to me, my theory is that, and we're very close, Jillian is kind of saying that this Jesus came from the council of the Anunnaki, and Emmanuel, E-E-A, Enki, N-K, and it seems to me that the Son of Man, Jesus Christ, Jesus Christos in Greece, same person. He says, to hell with this. I've loved her since I was a small man, since I was a youth. I've loved her since my childhood. It's in the Song of Solomon. And he finally marries the Black Madonna. It seems to me that wedding at Cana is Enki marrying Ninmah. And the Knights Templar found out 800 years later. Go ahead.
So can I throw some stuff in here then?
Go ahead.
As so much is bubbling out of me, right? Enki never married Ninmah. That's his half-sister. They did have a child together at one point, but they never married each other. So that's one thing I want to say. But this business of the wedding of Cana, now this is extremely important. And Christ tells you himself in this. He says, I am the Alpha and the Omega, first and last, right? And he demonstrates the Alpha and the Omega in a teaching which is in the wedding of Cana and the Last Supper, the first miracle and the last miracle, right? This is so important to understanding his message, right? Because it was a wedding feast, and it was probably his wedding feast. And in another situation, he was married to somebody else, and there's a whole thing there, right? But the important thing about this, if I may say so, about the marriage of Cana, is that when his mother asks him, and this is the secret of you have to ask. If you want anything from Spirit, anything, any of us want anything, we have to ask. So his mother asks, and she says, son, turn the water to wine. Bring more wine. So he gets the water, and he puts his hands over it, and then he tells the host to serve it. This is now wine he's serving, not cups of water. And everybody is stunned by it, as the story tells you. At the Last Supper, he does the same thing with the bread and the wine. Now, at the wedding feast, he's just turning water into wine to fulfill the requirements of earthly guests wanting a good drink at a wedding. And at the Last Supper, not for the large crowd of a wedding, but for the small select group of his disciples, he is turning wine into his own blood. What is this telling us? It's telling us that he's changing the frequency, because that's all it is. The liquid of water has a frequency. The liquid of wine has a different frequency. The water in the grapes becomes wine, right? Because during the process, there's a process. He's done the same water to wine. Now he does wine, changes it to the same frequency as his own blood. And the bread, this is my body, remember, take this in remembrance of me. And then he tells people to take it in remembrance of him. And it's like he's saying, I've taught you everything you need to know. I want you to go out and repeat these teachings to everybody, teach all the nations on the earth, and teach them to do this in remembrance of me. And then somewhere, and it's like he's given them a checkbook and told them what his signature is. He told them how to write the check out, right? And then weeks later, after the crucifixion, after he's returned, at the Feast of Pentecost, the story tells us how the light comes down from heaven and fills them. They become enlightened, and the energy of Spirit flows through them. Now, when energy of spirit flows through us, where does it come out? It comes out through the palms of our hands and the soles of our feet, essentially. But the palms of the hands are very powerful. That little wheel center in the palm, very powerful way of focusing the energy. That's why we can do laying on of hands, right? So when they ordained priests, in this case the disciples, they actually became representatives of Christ at the Feast of Pentecost. They've been given the way of doing it, and now the light filled them in such a way they now had the authority and the ability to pass on to anyone else that transformational step from water to wine, from wine to the blood of Christ, a change of the DNA of the structure. Had the human race continued to do that on a regular basis for the last 2,500 years, and at the same time try to live in accordance with the teachings of Christ, we would all now be fully Christ consciousness, enlightened beings ready to move forward into a higher frequency, because we would have changed our own DNA into a Christ-like or an Anunnaki-like DNA by now. We just haven't done it. But that whole thing from the Alpha to the Omega, the beginning and the end, is so important to the message, because it's the actual doing of the message, not just live right, but in the process, change your DNA and become right. Am I okay saying this?
Yes. Okay. Go ahead. Do you want to say something?
Well,
Sasha?
it's something philosophical, and it's really big to me. Is like the assumption that that we need a king, that we need a hierarchy, that some people are due to rule others. There's another whole view, which is that every light has to shine, every song has to be sung,
Right.
and they're all just as beautiful, and they're all simultaneous, and I dig them all.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. We should all be ruling ourselves. We shouldn't need rulers. We shouldn't need anybody telling us what to do. We've been told over and over again throughout history, not just 2,500 years ago, but many other times in history, of how to become fully enlightened beings, living in perfection as beings on this planet, being the actual shining stars that every soul really is. Instead of which, most people, and this is true today, so much today, we're seeing it all the time, most people choose to put themselves in the victim mode. They like to be presenting themselves, oh, I'm a victim. I'm a victim of what the government does. I'm a victim of what this disease is doing. I'm a victim of what other people is telling me. And I'm saying, no, stand up and be yourself, because the opportunity has always been there for you, and it's never too late to claim it. Even as it's like this last deathbed confession, it really never is too late to wake up and to say, yes, I get it, and I'm going to shine, and I'm going to be this holy, bright, enlightened person, because the light is constantly streaming from the source towards us. All we have to do is open our eyes and let it in. And this is a very literal thing. This is not a philosophical discussion type thing. This is an actuality. The energy, the life force of the universe is literally flowing out there in the light. And we can take it in and be enlightened beings. Everybody can. And then if everybody became enlightened, we wouldn't need anybody telling us what to do, because we would always be choosing to do the right thing. And that's really all life is about. When I worked for years as a clairvoyant, people would invariably ask me, well, what is God's purpose for me? And I said, well, if you need to think of it in that way, the only purpose is to become completely the best self that you can possibly be. And that's your choice, by making wise choices time after time, lifetime after lifetime. And it isn't as if we have to do this in a hurry. We have tens of thousands of years in which to do it. And as I said before, 10% of this population on this planet, the Earth population, have done it. They have become incredibly enlightened beings, far, way ahead. I mean, I can think just off the top of my head of a dozen people that I know that are light years ahead of where I would ever be in spiritual enlightenment. Really, really connected beings, and it's phenomenal. But the teaching is there from Christ.
Jillian, you were saying earlier that there's only a small percentage of the beings here on Earth are human. The rest are not human. Who's here?
No, I didn't say they weren't human. I said they weren't Earth human.
They weren't Earth human. Okay, where are they from? How do we tell them from the Earth humans?
You've got people from Arcturus. You've got people from multiple planetary systems. We've had at least 5 different planetary species on this Earth forever, ever since the Anunnaki opened this planet up to development, right? And that's like, but the time of the dinosaurs was still on the ground when it was first viewed and opened up, before Atlantis, right? Then once it was opened up, once the way was made to get through the asteroid belt, other planets followed, and they used it. George was right when he used to talk about this being a prison planet, because it was used by many planetary systems as a dumping ground in much the same way as the British used to send their prisoners to Australia when they didn't know what to do with them. And it's been a habit in the universe that other planets have sent people here.
How do these people know that they're not human Earthlings? Or do they know? Does anybody know their origin?
Well,
of their
maybe they do. Maybe they do. Maybe they don't. I don't know whether they do or not. I mean, we're all humans. You know, there's humans throughout this universe. The great vast human. What do they say human stands for? Higher universal man, right? And there are certainly human species that pretty much have, I think I understand that concept in the idea that when we say humans, we mean beings who have evolved in a certain universe that has a certain intrinsic underlying set of values, and that is inherent in every development throughout that particular universe. And so, for instance, what was told to me a long time ago was that the reptilian species do not belong in our universe. They came through an event which happened, right, eons and eons ago, and they came from their own universe into ours. And the reason they are so different to us is because they came from a universe which had a different underlying value system. And so humans might take various sort of forms, basically, you know, arms, legs, a head, and body, right? But they might look a lot different from different planetary systems in our universe, but they're still all human. They still have the same underlying values built into them. Like thou shalt not kill is very basic. And the thing is that souls that are developing, all human souls that come into being at one time or another, and have done long before Earth existed. We've had humans on other planets, reaching very high civilizations. But what has invariably happened in the past is that when that particular development, that particular civilization's planet, let's say it was another system like our solar system, long before our solar system began, billions of years ago, let's say, and that wherever this planet was, it had developed a high civilization out of itself in the natural way, according to natural laws, as do exist throughout the universe. But when its sun died and went brown dwarf, that civilization died with its sun. It ceased to exist. The sun ceased to exist. The planet ceased to exist. The system fell apart. It all ceased to exist. And another system was developing somewhere else, out of the stardust or whatever, right? So what happened on Earth and made it very popular and really crowded now, not only with people who were sent here to as prisoners in the beginning, but crowding here now by choice, because when they have died from their own planet, they said, hey, I want a life on Earth, I want a life on Earth. And they're crowding down here now because we're coming to this moment of great change, which is also a moment of huge opportunity for souls wanting to progress, wanting to leap forward. And really everybody wants to get on the bandwagon. This is the most exciting time that this quadrant of the universe has seen in about 500,000 years, a very long stretch of time, maybe even longer than that. No, I think about 500,000 years was the last great energy burst like this. And now this light is just rolling in, and has been coming in since the late 90s. It's just getting more and more intense. And people are waking up. It's a most exciting time in human history. And there is a real chance at this break, which is expected expected at the end of 2025. The winter solstice of 2025 through the spring solstice of 2026 is the time when it is expected that the old cycle will end and switch and the new cycle will begin. And it comes in that in the Bible it talks about the days, when the sun goes dark and there are like 3 days of darkness or whatever, except that you won't know it's 3 days or nights because there will be no measure of time. And then a new time begins. Our time is ending this time, and a new time is beginning. And part of the reason why a new time is beginning is because this planet will be shifted about 4 more degrees away from the sun. So we can expect actually something like a mini ice age on the planet. And then we will be a colder planet generally because we will be another 4 degrees further away from the sun. And this happens every time there's one of these huge evolutionary cycles in the universe. I mean, think about it. We have 365 days and a little bit that we count in the year now. And when the Anunnaki first came here and mapped this planet, did all the measuring, actually, even before they broke through, about 4 million years ago, before they broke through the asteroid belt, when they were simply measuring, this planet took 360 days to go around the sun. Its orbital time took 360 Earth days and nights. That's why we have 360 degrees in a circle. If you go to Saturn, which takes a lot longer to go, then you have a lot more degrees in a circle. So it's the degree that's the measure of time and not the distance. But now we have 365, and we will have more when we move farther out. We will need to start counting differently. And this is fairly recent. When David did 52-week calendar in the first place, it was easy to divide the year into 52 weeks. The moon calendar, because it was a strict 28 days. We hadn't moved that far.
Sasha had a comment. Go ahead. We're trying to say something.
No, long time ago.
Doesn't remember. Glenn, what do you want to say?
I want to go back to I want to go back to the statement about if people had followed the lessons of Jesus and the bread and wine, we'd be closer to having maybe more people ascending. What about the Muslims and the Jews? Who was their God, and how did they miss the boat?
Well, I don't think they did miss the boat. I don't think that's the point. The choice was there. We all have choice. We choose, right? The Islamic faith are the descendants of Ishmael, right? As you know, as opposed to the descendants of Abraham coming through that lineage. But the message of Christ was universal. Indeed, the word Catholic means universal for everybody. So everybody on the planet 2,500 years ago had the opportunity to pick up the message of the teachers. And in fact, Christ himself.
Okay.
She's gone.
We lost Jillian again, I think, but she might come back. So, Glenn, what do you think about what you were just talking about, the message? What's your thoughts on that?
I'm still like a dog with a bone going after the Knights Templar knowledge. What did they find out? And what did they bring to northern Canada? And I can't get Jillian. What did they find out? What did they what?
Yeah, we want the answer to that one.
Yeah. So say it again. What did they find out? What did they bring? Because
well, the Knights Templar found something in Jerusalem. The Black Madonnas appeared all over southern France, up into Poland. That's how far they were. A woman appeared at Fatima, and is an ancient treasure was buried in the chateau in southern France, and then moved.
Yeah,
it went from Montségur in southern France in the 1200s, the Cathar secret. They went to Rennes-le-Château, and then it left. So where did it go?
Oh,
Jillian back?
Off.
Hello.
Jillian, you're back.
We couldn't hear you. So
Lessin.
phrase your question again, because Jillian's now back.
No, I heard the question. I could hear you. You just couldn't hear me. I don't know what happens. About after Rennes-le-Château, you know, I have some friends here in Montana, and they just actually spent a week over in Rennes-le-Château with a French authoress who has written extensively on this subject and lives in the area and has spent her life digging around. And I can't remember her name, but I'm going to try and get her books because it is a fascinating story. And I was just rereading Holy Blood, Holy Grail again. I think it's probably the third time I've read that book. It really is a fascinating story. But where everything went, or indeed what it was, I don't know. I do know the Cathars secret thing, though. You know, the Cathars were in the... Well, I don't know their secret, but I know what's behind the idea of it. Because the story, or the belief is, that Mary Magdalene and the, Christ's family went to the Languedoc, right? And the Languedoc is that area where the Cathars were so strong. Now, the name Languedoc means language of yes, or language of the birds, right? It's the language of the birds. And the language of the birds, or the language of yes, is the actual language of creation. I have not cracked it. I have been, before I knew about the people writing about Rennes-le-Château, I knew about the Languedoc. And I have to tell you, I've been practicing since I was a child, trying to work out what this sound is, what this vibrationary frequency is, which manifests, right? It is no mistake in the Bible, it says, and God said, let there be light, right? Because it's the saying of it. It's the sound, the frequency that manifests. Now, I understand about the diamond form and, the sine waves through every proton that manifests the creation, the reality. But how or what that sound is, I don't know. And that's the secret of the Cathars. And I think that may have been a big part of the secret, because if you know the secret of creation, and even if, you're totally materialistic and using it only for that purpose, and of course that's even more efficient than hunting for the philosopher's stone, because you can turn it into the Midas touch if you wish. There is no reason why you can't. So it's a fascinating idea. But I think that's part of the secret of Chateau Lorraine, for what I know about Rennes-le-Château. And what did they call the priest? What was his name? I've forgotten his name.
Bernard.
I've forgotten. The one who built the Magdalene Tower at Chateau Lorraine.
Yes.
Yes. And he left everything to his housekeeper, Marie, and then... Sadly, the woman had a stroke and couldn't tell what information he'd left with her. She died, and so it died. The information died with her, unfortunately. But what the connection is with that, with the Templars and the chapel at Roslin in Scotland, I don't know. But I do know that chapel in Roslin and the Stuart family and the Sinclairs, of course. It really is an interesting story. And for anyone who has the means to research it, I would think that it's well worth the effort, just for the sake of knowing, Well,
let's
what
go.
do you know about it, Glenn?
Well, let's go with where the treasure, I think, went. I don't think anything went to Roslyn. I think it was a feint, and they took the people up there on a wild goose chase. I think 24 ships left from a port in France in 1107, when the Knights Templar were persecuted by the Pope and the King of France. They went to two ports. One was in Mexico, but the most important one was in Nova Scotia. And there at Oak Island, they buried treasure. And as the French explorers came after them, that was in 1307, so in 1500, late 1400s, Cartier showed up and looking for something. And I think they moved the treasure to Edmonton, where we started this show.
Oh, now this is interesting. Carry on.
And then the key is that this Kensington rune stone that's near you, or kind of near you, from Hawaii and Ottawa, it's nearer to you than us, the Kensington rune stone. Do you know it? It's in Minnesota.
No, I don't know. I'm not near Minnesota.
It says that there are runes there of the Knights Templar. A guy named Scott Walter looked at it in the last 20 years, and he figured out that the mark that's there has a dot on it, which Cistercian monks would know, and that's a landmark of a land treaty between the Micmac Indians of Nova Scotia and the Knights Templar. That is, they made a land claim for North America, which later Francis Bacon said this is the new Atlantis. So I'm an Indigenous lawyer, and I'm Métis. My family goes back to 1600 in Quebec City from France. And enough of my sources of realizing I'm Métis and being a Métis lawyer that in northern Alberta, that is where the Ark of the Covenant is. And so a feint was made to Roslyn Chapel, or it was put there and Sinclair brought it to Nova Scotia. Whichever way it went, it ended up there. But these Micmac Indians this is why they were killed. They were almost completely wiped out as the Jesuits tried to find this ark. And so now when you started the show about fell off the chair about Edmonton,
well,
that's where these guys are.
Where they're coming. And of course, the ark being a communicating base, right, between heaven and earth, that's exactly what they would need to put at the sort of Anunnaki NASA. What did NASA call it? What do they call Houston when NASA's sending up spaceships? What's the term they use for not control room?
Command Central.
Command center. Yeah, that's what they would need for their command center. And if it does exist on the Earth today, why not use it? If it's already here.
Well, you're in Montana. You're very near the Blackfeet, the Blackfoot tribe.
Yeah,
and the Blackfeet tribe. This is who taught me this, Jillian. It was the Blackfeet tribe. We're in treaty with them now.
Well, that's interesting because years ago they maybe you've heard of this one. His name was not Grey Wolf, not Standing Bear. Maybe Standing Bear. Standing Bear. But he's an anthropologist who 20 years ago was, I know for sure 20 years ago, was teaching anthropology at the university in Bozeman. And he was doing a book signing in Butte. And I went there with a colleague of mine who was visiting from Alaska. She was another clairvoyant. And we went and we said, come on, we'll get his book and we'll get him to sign it. It was just a small book he did of Indian stories, and I've never been able to find it. It must be somewhere. But when we got there, he looked at us and he said, you girls, you're seers, aren't you? And we said, well, yes. And he said, yes. He said, at any time you would like to meet the real medicine men of the tribe, he said, you come up to Browning and ask for me, and I'll introduce you. Because he said the stories at the time, there was a writer called Andrews who was putting out a lot of Indian stories that were supposed to have been told to her by this Indian wise person, And he said they're just a lot of the stories that you tell for the tourists. But he said these that I've put together in this book, these are the background. He said they're not the whole story, but they're the true story. And he said if you want to meet the medicine men, I'll take you. So obviously, I never went. I go in and out through Browning all the time because my friend lives over the border in Alberta, but I never went and looked him up. And now you're telling me I could have had all this information 20 years ago. See how stupid I am. How stupid.
You could go now. Such a
I
late.
could accept. Well, I think he's dead by now because he was a lot older than me then. And I'm pretty ancient. So.
Why are you laughing, Glenn? What's the revelation? Tell us what's going on.
Pardon?
Glenn, you were laughing. What's the revelation you're getting there?
What made you laugh?
She didn't go. She didn't go. She had a chance to go and get it. She's a seer. They told her she's a seer, and she could meet the medicine man.
And I didn't go. Well, listen, I'll tell you this, because, first of all, it is true that I've had more than one Indian life as an Indian, as a Sioux, right? And
okay.
In my history, and it's true, when I was a kid in this life, I always sided with the Indians in the movies because, I know what it's like to be an Indian, right? And I always loved the life, right? I was a sorceress, medicine woman, did healing, and I blighted the odd cow or two here and there as well when I felt like it, having a bad hair day. You know how it goes, right? But I have had more than one life as an Indian, but I've never had in this life. I've never had attachment to those lives. It was not something that drew me. My friend, who I've worked with for a long time, she's been living up in Alaska and is now in Australia, but she was, her father was a full-blood Indian, and she was very attached to the shamanistic path of spiritual work and study. It never drew me at all. It wasn't that I didn't know about it or didn't respect it. It just didn't fascinate me at all. I had no real interest in it. So I never paid attention. And I used to get gifts. Now, over in, did you say you're from Quebec or Toronto?
I'm up in Ottawa now, but I'm born in Toronto. But I live in Ottawa, like north of Montreal.
Over in Toronto, there are native blood nations called the Torontos, right? In Toronto. American and Canadian Indians, let's put it that way, that are Toronto, right? One of them
Toronto means the meeting place by the waters. There's no time.
Yeah, well, there's whatever the native blood tribes of the Toronto area are. That's what I'm talking about.
There's about 10 of them running around.
Well, one of them has one of their chiefs, Chief Long. It doesn't matter anyway. I've forgotten his name, but it doesn't matter. He and his son every year, apparently, would go to Oregon and follow on foot on the ground, follow the eagles. So when the eagles dropped a feather, they would collect it, and that's how they got their eagle feathers. And one year when I was living over in Michigan, they sent me a gift, and I knew a gentleman in India who was in Michigan. He's a physiotherapist at the Ford Hospital called Dr. Joseph Steike. And Dr. Steike his mother was full-blood Apache. And when he'd been 8 years old, he'd been sent to live with his uncle and trained as an Indian medicine man. And then when he completed all that training as a Apache, a medicine man, he went to Hawaii and was invited by the kahunas in Hawaii to go and train with them. And he trained to be kahuna. So he was like in his 80s when I knew him. And this is nearly 40 years ago. And when I went down to his office one day, he gave me this blanket, and it's like sheep's wool that's been woven onto a fabric backing. And I said, "What's this for?" He said, "It's a healing blanket." He said, I wish I could remember this Indian's name. Anyway, he's from Toronto. He said, "He sent you this as a gift." And I said, "But I don't know him." He said, "No." He said, "He sent you 2 feathers as well." And he said, they're eagle feathers. I still have them. And I didn't know it was illegal to have eagle feathers in America. Apparently it is. But anyway, he sent me 2 eagle feathers and this blanket. And he said, please tell Jillian that, we honor her as our queen. And when she's doing work with healing, this will help her. She can use the feathers and the blanket. And it's all been tribally blessed and all the rest of it. And then he gave me this picture. And this picture is from a newspaper in the 1920s. And it's like a sketch drawings of all the chiefs at all the Sioux chiefs at the last battle. And they said that this belongs to you. It was all framed and everything. I still have it. And I said, this belongs to you because you're Queen of the Sioux. So when I went home with this, and I was teaching classes in metaphysics in Michigan, and I had this thing, and when the class came in that next night or so, they said, where did you get this? I said, don't you know I'm Queen of the Sioux, so you better bow your heads when you come in the door. And they just all cracked up laughing. But it was they seriously... and the interesting and heartbreaking thing for me, and the reason why I've never got rid of the big picture, is because I was a young girl then, 17 years old, and my family married me off to like a head of the Nez Perce. I hate to say his name, poor man, but they married me off to him, and it wasn't who I wanted to marry at all. I wanted to marry my cousin. And my cousin became one of these Sioux chiefs. And I'll tell you his name. His name was Red Shirt. He's just gorgeous. And I have his picture up here on my windowsill, you see, and I can look at him. And the interesting thing is that I've met him in this life again.
What?
And that's
wow.
Oh yes, and I was not interested in that past life because it was one of great disappointment to me. I was a young girl married to an old man, and I had to give up my pony. So the memories from that life are not happy ones for me, right? And I couldn't be married to this cousin that I really, really adored, right?
Jillian, anyway, did George know about this?
Oh yeah, of course.
What?
I've known George for a long time. So this Indian man, I met him in this lifetime, and when we met. Now here's a kicker. We met in Zurich, at the airport in Zurich, both en route to Singapore, right, with a 6-hour layover. So he just started talking to me, and we got talking. We nearly missed the flight. But this man couldn't get away. I hate to put it like this because it sounds so egotistical, but he was totally fascinated with me, and he could never work out why, because he didn't remember me. And as soon as before I looked at him physically, as soon as his energy came into my field, like there was this energy person in front of me, I knew who it was instantly. And he never remembered who I was. But we stayed in touch for 2 or 3 years. And my regret over it was, of course, that I know he'll have spent the rest of his life wondering what happened to her and why was I so fascinating to him, because he couldn't understand it. I mean, there was nothing to be fascinated with. It was just me. And people often don't understand that. When you meet people from past lives that you have previously had really close connections with. I should say this man and I were married in the 1800s and lived back east in Tennessee. And so I've known him for a long time. And in fact, he was the young officer I ran away with that got me killed in the first place. So he's been in and out of many lives for me. But sometimes you meet people and you feel a really strong connection with them, but you don't understand why, because they may be not physically particularly attractive to you, or you're not on the same page intellectually or philosophically, or you have completely different views, and it's like, why do I keep going back and talking to this person? And there's nothing I don't understand the attraction. And often when that happens to us, it's because you're not remembering the connection that were made eons ago, past lives, a long, long time ago. And you've made these connections, and they're never lost. This is what's important. They're never lost. It's no mistake that, in most marriage ceremonies, not all, but in most, it says, till death do us part, right? And certainly the traditional ones, love, honor, and obey till death do us part. And that's because that physical connection gets broken with death. But the energy that belongs between you is never lost. And no matter how many people your soul connects with in that way, you're just growing or expanding your soul family, which is all loved equally, all loved the same. And so we have our emotions and passions and desires in this world, in this life, but in an eternal sense, we're constantly expanding our soul's families with people we know, and continue to know on other frequencies, other realms, in other places. And I've always found that interesting and exciting, and quite frankly, very encouraging, because some of us, especially in this cycle, which is the last kind of life like this that most of us will have, it's been a very hard road for so many people. We've had so much old karma to clean up in this life that it seems that our lives have gone from one disaster to the next, to the next, to the next. It's been one chaotic process after another as we're scrambling to get everything in order before we come to the end of the cycle. So I find it very encouraging to think, yes, but out there in the universe, on the planes, there are dozens of people maybe even hundreds, that I have strong bonds of love and affection with, which never die, which never goes away, which is there for us forever. And I find that very encouraging.
So, Jillian, you came in and you had full memory, and so you remember where you were for the last several lifetimes. And you remember being an Anunnaki. Explain how you're an Anunnaki. And as an Anunnaki, how did you come to the Earth?
Okay. My most distant memory is just being an energy, a self-aware energy form in the universe. And I don't remember where I originated or how I originated. I just have that awareness of being on my own in the universe, just looking at things. And then at some point, I encountered the Anunnaki species eons ago. And I was invited to join them, which I did. They kind of adopted me. They took me in, you might say, like I was an orphan, and they took me in. And I spent a very long time with them, right through the tail end of the dinosaur period, which of course was the Atlantis and Lemuria. I lived in both Atlantis and Lemuria. I learned healing modalities when I lived in Lemuria, but I also lived for a long time in Atlantis. And then I got another destruction thing happened to me then, and it trapped me. I don't know how to explain this. When you go out of body and you move out into space, but for some reason you don't have proper management of your energy, or you're not able to manage it yourself properly, and you don't stick with the motion of the universe, the convoluted curve. You get off the curves and you get into the angles, and you can get trapped. You can't. There's no door. There's no way out, and you get trapped. So I got trapped in one of these dark spaces, and it wasn't the first time, but I got rescued anyway from that. And I got rescued at the time that the one I called David was actually being Thoth the Egyptian at the time. And of course his epithet is Ningashida. He's the second son of the Enki, and he only became Ningashida. He only got that epithet years later, after we'd built the science laboratories in East Africa. And Ningashida means Lord Gish of Sheba, and of course that country was known as Sheba at the time. He was Lord Gish of Sheba, or Ningashida, and he was at the time that he rescued me, he was in Egypt. Well, then another, there was a whole, Egyptian thing going on, and development was going on, trying to bring things up, bring humanity up. The genetic engineering was done, the time moved along, and then I had another accident and got killed, and I was actually not resuscitatable after that incident, and the only way to get me back was to have me reborn in a physical way as opposed to reproduced in the Anunnaki way. So I was born to Anunnaki parents, to Ana and Marcus, and they still are my parents, obviously. They're still on the spaceship. I'm only like 2 or 3 years older to them than I was when I left them. But with them, I came to Earth about 400,000 years ago. We came and found the laboratories in Southeast Africa and started the genetic engineering. I got killed. I got reborn. I came back with Marcus and Anna. And my elder brother was a lot older than me. Years older than me. And he was commander of one of the landing groups. And now I'm back about 15,000 years. He was commander of this group of 12 landing ships that were coming down to the planet. And we landed in the Aegean. And it was at the end of an mini sort of ice age. The snow was still melting. And we were supposed to land on this snowfield. And we came round like you do, round and round your path, and came down Bogue. And there had been, in like a 24-hour period before we landed, there had been this massive thaw, and right underneath a very thin shell of snow were all these black basalt rocks sticking up. And the whole group of 12, we landed right on top of them. And the landing craft was so badly damaged that they really couldn't be repaired, so we had to stay. I was only supposed to be coming for a day trip with my brother, like an outing, night. And I was the equivalent of Earth years. I would have been 17 at that time. That's when I came back to Earth as a teenager, really. In Anunnaki terms, of course, it was 3,000 times 17, 3,600 times 17. But in terms of Earth, I was like a 17-year-old. When we came into the solar system, that was my 17th birthday. And we landed, and the ice had melted, and we got stuck here. The young man I'm telling you about, who I eventually ran away with, and all the story, who was an Indian, and all the rest of that same man, I'd been training on the way in on the ship in navigation. For something to do, they'd been teaching me navigation systems. And he was a young navigation officer, and when we landed, he broke his arm. And we all moved into this big cave down on the beach until they found somewhere for us to live. And as I was actually qualified as a medical technician, I'd just graduated the year before. And so I'm having to look after all these people, and I got to know him then because he got this broken arm, and I took care of him. That's how we got together in the first place. And so I stayed on the planet. And at that time, the one I called David Ningashida was being Thoth, but now he was no longer my lover. Now he was my grandfather, my mother's father. And so I was put under his wing because my parents were still on the ship, and he took care of me and took me under his wing, and he gave me all kinds of cushy jobs, including playing, like being priestess at Karnak and all these things. I was here on the planet during that period for about 10,000 years, playing all these different roles.
It's coming on, and we're at the end of the show, but we'll have you back with you, Glenn. And so, thank you, Glenn.
I'm sorry, your phone's cutting off.